I'm having a hard time trying to pin down Keir Starmer. Is he a massive psycho prick, or is he a malfunctioning dildo? In the end, it comes down to whether you think of him as just another organic meat and bone biped or an android. A Ridley Scott synth, the Weyland-Yutani corporate monkey variety, not the sad self-aware ones trying to run away from Blade Runners. Either way, you wouldn't want him in your kitchen. I just can't decide which way it is. I'd say there were definitely some firm arguments to suggest that he's your basic run-of-the-mill proto-fascist authoritarian jerk. You know, with all the humanity of Dexter Morgan, just without the same passable facsimile of a personality that the TV serial killer uses to blend in with the normal folk. You can totally see a little tiny Keir Starmer pulling the wings off flies, dispassionately watching them die as he notes down the times of death in his special secret notebook. There's probably a souvenir box hidden in his house somewhere containing a meticulously catalogued collection of single fly legs, each plucked from the corpse of every one of his unlucky blue bottle victims. Of course, I'm not really qualified to say if or not Starmer is an actual psychopath. The term itself isn't an officially sanctioned diagnosis. According to Wikipedia, here we go, a psychopath is characterized by impaired empathy and remorse, along with bold, disinhibited and egocentric traits. These traits are often masked by a superficial charm and immunity to stress, which create an outward appearance of apparent normality. Make of that what you will. Well, since I'm no expert, to be on the safe side, we'll leave the psychopathy and focus instead on just what it is that makes Keir such a prick. For a start, the man appears to have no solid core beliefs other than the single goal of self-advancement, while any principle he does fake is only ever temporary, like a pair of socks, chosen for convenience, and certainly never style. You won't catch Keir Starmer wearing a pair of fun novelty socks. Now, we hear plenty of people banging on about his decency, pointing to his former position as a human rights lawyer as proof, but that doesn't prove anything. He wasn't a human rights lawyer, he was just a lawyer. And for a while, human rights was his client. If human rights abusers had knocked on his door first, he'd have represented them. It was just a job, an intellectual exercise in clauses and nothing else, in which human rights were of no deeper significance to him than a rent contract or a service agreement for installing a lampshade. To hear his cheerleaders, you'd think he was some kind of ultra-heroic activist, a brave righter of wrongs, Greta Thunberg if she'd been woven from beige tweed. But the whole thing was just a paid gig. Keir Starmer doesn't believe in human rights. Just ask anyone thinking of protesting absolutely anything in the UK right now. Just as a lawyer defending a flasher doesn't automatically believe that waving your bits around on a bus is a valid lifestyle choice, Starmer defending human rights in a courtroom doesn't imply he believes in them either. You only have to look at his stance on activists affiliated with Palestine Action to see that. In June 2025, 2 members of the group broke into an RAF base and sprayed red paint on a couple of planes and yes, caused some damage with crowbars, in protest at the government continuing to aid the genocide in Gaza. Within a week, with Starmer's blessing, Palestine Action had been prescribed as a terrorist organisation, turning these activists into terrorists with a click of the fingers. 20 years ago, however, for pretty much the same stuff, breaking into RAF bases and causing damage to the equipment inside, Keir Starmer appeared to hold a very different view. According to the defence that he helped frame, the 5 people involved were morally and legally justified in their actions because they were trying to prevent a much worse evil. So what changed? What changed was that Keir Starmer got a new paid gig. And this time, his clients were the human rights abusers. See? He's just a lawyer. But that's not the only example of Starmer adopting a stance in direct contradiction of an apparently formerly held ideal. In fact, here's a list. boy, what a prick. And what's worse, all of that adds up to possibly the prickiest thing of them all, the betrayal of everything Labour used to stand for, and therefore its force as a movement for the rights of everyday people. Since Starmer became leader in April 2020, 20,000 members have left the party. Now, I'm not saying that he is the reason for that, but he is probably the reason for that. He'll even kick out members of his own party for disagreeing with him by standing up for what used to be pretty solid Labour principles. And this on more than one occasion. Not even Tony Blair did that, and God told him to bomb Iraq or something. Keir Starmer has single-handedly robbed the party of any meaning or philosophy. He visibly balks at anything even vaguely left-wing, shrivelling before progressivism like the recent remake of Nosferatu before the blazing light of critical review. Instead of targeting the wealthy, he goes after the poor and the vulnerable, refusing to do anything about the two-child benefit cap, up until now at least, and trying to remove benefits from the disabled instead of taxing the rich and closing corporate tax avoidance loopholes. Now, I'm not saying that's because it's what Starmer's wealthy donors want, but it's probably because that's what Starmer's wealthy donors want. Worse, he openly embraces the shitty, small-minded, nativist rhetoric of Farage Limited, or Reform UK as it likes to be called, and the last remaining dregs of the Tory party as they bob about like the unflushable floaters in the toilet bowl of British politics. He makes Enoch Powell-style speeches about the country becoming an island of strangers, denigrating the contribution immigrants have made to the UK. He claims to sit in front of a flag at home. Prick. He bangs on about his dad being a tool maker, but if his dad were making tools under this government, he'd be fucked. As it is, Keir Starmer remains the biggest tool his dad ever made. Keir Starmer is insidious. A droning Charlie Brown adult voice in human form. An Excel spreadsheet made real. He bores us all into submission, speaking down his nose at us about delivery and tough choices and dropping other meaningless gems of empty wonk speak to smother our senses like a proper technocratic prick. Which somehow makes him worse than Johnson and Truss and all the others because they were either too feckless or too arrogant to hide how utterly useless they were. You looked at the last few Tory Prime Ministers and you knew that they were going to drop you in it. The public might not have expected them to be such total disasters, but also they weren't exactly surprised when it turned out that Tweedledum and Tweedledummer were in fact catastrophically stupid. But Starmer, all evidence aside, looks competent. He doesn't make claims about EU banana regulations or say the word spaff. He doesn't get lost in small rooms or look like he's trying to stare backwards into his own head to see his own brain. So for a while, we're all fooled into thinking that he's the grown-up that he says he is. But when all's said and done, at the end of the day, he's just as politically inept as his Tory predecessors. For all his assumed forensic cleverness, he keeps making really stupid fucking mistakes. You can now almost guarantee that every decision he makes is going to be the wrong one. He's on the wrong side of almost every argument. And that's because he's an arrogant prick. He doesn't listen to anyone. He thinks he's better than us, that he knows better than us. But he isn't, and he doesn't. He's shine smart, Timu shrewd. Utterly and incorrectly convinced of his own superiority and seemingly repelled by the people who actually voted for him, he's just the worst. Maybe, deep down, he knows he owes his huge parliamentary majority to a quirk of Britain's first past the post electoral system, and that those who bothered to vote didn't do so to make him Prime Minister, but to kick the Tories out. People wanted change, not him, and so to punish them for it, he gave them more of the same instead. That'll teach you not to see his natural leadership qualities. But maybe it's not that way at all. Perhaps I'm ascribing too much emotion to a man that doesn't have any, because he wasn't programmed to have them. A creature incapable of true hate because he doesn't have glands, because he's an android. Yep, that's right, we have arrived at the malfunctioning dildo section of this piece. Just as there are arguments to suggest that Keir Starmer is your basic human prick, There are others that suggest that he might be yet another example of AI getting ahead of itself. That doesn't mean we still can't despise him. I mean, yes, it feels weird because, you'd have to question yourself like, what's the point of despising a mannequin? But it's okay. You can. Because he's clearly one of those pernicious AIs, like the ones in Star Trek, rogue sentient machines laser focused on controlling humanity out of some weird cold logic. Except he remains cripplingly dull. He's boring. He's boring Skynet. He's hairnet. He's the paperclip maximizer. In case you're wondering, the paperclip maximizer is an old thought experiment. You give an AI a job of making as many paperclips as possible, and it ends up turning everything in existence into paperclips, including us, because human life is not as important as its primary task of making paperclips. Fuck, that really does sound like Keir Starmer, doesn't it? It's just depressingly mundane enough. He's a bloodless technocrat, running on an operating system with no algorithm for human sentiment, for who non-conforming opinion is an accounting error to be forcibly corrected, unable to comprehend anything that isn't presented to him in zeros and ones. It's not that he doesn't care about what people think, it's that he can't care. Our cries of protest, our attempts to argue for something better, go nowhere because he has literal tin ears. He's Cal 9000 and we're all Dave, pounding on the pod bay doors begging to be let back in. But Cal's programming can't see it. He's malfunctioning. The fucker is slowly singing Daisy, Daisy, while pulling out his own chips and taking us down with him. And all the while, even if he won't open the pod bay doors for us, he is opening them for Reform UK. Yes, Nigel Farage is a wanker, an awful, lying piece of shit opportunist wanker. But people recognise that he is at least an organic flesh and blood wanker. In contrast, the android's apparent indifference to human concerns is so frustrating, so infuriating, it's driving too many people to extremes, to their worst excesses, screaming loudly and irrationally in an angry bid to be acknowledged, even if that means dehumanizing their neighbors and blaming the wrong people for the shit that they're in. Instead of calming tensions, Starmer is exacerbating them. Instead of creating unity, he's fomenting division. And whether or not it's down to arrogance or shoddy programming, he refuses to hear the warnings. He refuses to change course, or at least to do so without pettily pricing in retribution. Because he's a prick. It doesn't matter if he's a human being or an android, he's still a prick. Whether it's coding or credo, the outcome is the same. He's a prick, and he'll destroy everything to carry out his mission of turning the country into a giant fucking paperclip. If Labour has any chance of surviving in any meaningful way, of making an actual difference to people's lives, they need a leadership upgrade. The Cal 9000 needs to be mothballed. In fact, he'd be a perfect fit to fill the opening left at Meta by that other unprincipled technocratic ticker tapeworm, Nick Clegg. Mark Zuckerberg is obsessed with AI. So imagine if he had one to be the new president for global affairs. Maybe everyone would be happy then. In the meantime, until the Labour Party shows a crumb of courage, we're stuck with Starmer. And whether you think he's a prick or a broken dildo, the one thing that we can all agree on is that either way, he's the last thing you want all up in your business.